Michelle, can you turn off that music? Yeah, as all our panelists and some more panelists have joined us, I will take a few more minutes here to test the mic once again for all the panelists and the moderators present here. I request all the panelists to please unmute yourself and say hello.
Hello, this is Ajinder.
Yes, hi ma'am, thank you.
Hello, this is Sulochana from Bhubaneswar. Sulochana Das, State Commissioner, persons with disabilities.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, this is Vikrant.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, this is Paritosh.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Welcome once again to our protection consultation on strengthening coordination for emergency preparedness for response. I would like to welcome Mr. Vikrant Mahajan, Spear India. Mr. Vikrant has 24 years of professional experience working at interagency policy level and frontline humanitarian action with government, UN, corporations, CSOs, and armed forces in diverse contexts. He has led interagency coordination for more than 100 disasters and represents on governance and policy level committees of several international organizations. He currently works as CEO of Spear India. Welcome, sir. I will now hand this over to Mr. Vikrant, CEO of Spear India, to welcome and introduce all our speakers today. Over to you, sir.
Vikrant sir, you're muted.
Thank you so much. It's my privilege to welcome all of you on this consultation for strengthening protection sector coordination. It's one of the important sector in the series of consultations we are doing sector-wise, the sixth one in place. And today we have with us a very group of a very eminent panelists to speak on the protection issues. I take the opportunity to welcome Major General M.K. Bindal. He is the Executive Director of National Disaster Management and alumni of prestigious National Defense Academy. Major General Bindal has also served as Deputy Director General in Directorate of Army, Air Defense and Director of Center for United Nations Peacekeeping in New Delhi. He has a vast experience working on various disasters and other issues, and we will be having a privilege to listen to him. I take the opportunity to welcome Ms. Lushna Das ji. She is the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities for the Government of Odisha. She's also been appointed as a spokesperson for BJD. Since her appointment, she has made it her first priority to give safeguard to the rights of differently able people in an as envisioned in the legislation and other related guidelines. And look forward to seeing and let's listen to her. Welcome, ma'am. I welcome Shri Jagannath Patiji. He is the Joint Secretary and Integrated Finance Officer of the Ministry of Women and Child Development. He has also served as Registrar in the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. and also as the national nodal officer handling grievances related to the violation of child rights in the country. He has over 20 years of working profit organizations in the country, several foreign agencies and government bodies in about 25 countries, dealing with grants, grievance redressal, training, and capacity building. It's our privilege to have you with us, sir. We welcome you. I also take an opportunity to welcome Shri Sadev Singh ji. He is the Under Secretary to the Government of India for Ministry of Law and Justice and also Ministry of Home Affairs. He has also served as the Under Secretary to the Government of India, Ministry of Human Resource Development, and has been on deputation as Assistant Commissioner, South Delhi Municipal Corporation. His vast knowledge in the field is widely recognized, and he has completed Masters of Art, LLB, LLM, PG Diploma in Constitutional Law, PG Diploma in International Law and Diplomacy, and PG Diploma in Parliamentary Procedure and Institution. That's a lot of experience, sir. We look forward to hear from you. I welcome you again. And with this, I will like to introduce our moderator, Shri Anil Sinha ji. Anil Sinha ji is a pioneer of disaster management in India, has been part of the high-powered committee which led to the development of National Disaster Management Act and the institutionalization of various disaster management institutions in the country. Shri Sinha also have been the vice chairman of Bihar State Disaster Management Authority, bringing a lot of changes at the state level there, and has been served at international level with International Recovery Platform, World Bank, and other places. It's our privilege to have him as a moderator here today, and I will hand over this to Mr. Anil Sinha for further moderation and guiding us through this. I think a brief on a background of this particular today's discussion is, I think, as we distill our experiences of past many disasters, we see that the people, who are among the most vulnerable ones, and also in our country, of a social context in our country, also those who are the most marginalized ones are among the most vulnerables, and they often get excluded, or their specific needs not get addressed in the emergencies and other contexts, to say there is. So it's important to look at their protection, social protection issues, specifically, and apart from it, and generally, for overall, whatever social protections programming the government is having and the non-government is having, to see it together. The major issue we see in the collaborative efforts of the government and non-government actors has been a coordination. While we all feel at disaster that they need for improved coordination, they need for more efficiency and effectiveness. However, there remains a gap and a lot to be learned, a lot to be improved on coordination. So we started an exercise around 9 months back with the help of our key members and some of them who leads and on the various protection issues across the country, with also many of them involved internationally. We picked up our international good practice learnings from on protection issues from various other disasters worldwide, but specifically looking at our own Indian context and very local context. What are the very specific protection issues? And we try to put it together in the form of a handbook, which will guide the coordination, interagency coordination during disaster, for both preparedness and emergency response to disasters. So this guideline is now at a stage of a first draft, and we are opening up it for consultation process, inviting inputs from across the stakeholders. A series of consultations are happening on that. This one is also in the series. There will be more consultation happening at the state level and community level to inform this draft. And once we have got these inputs, we will revise the revised draft. A near final draft will be again put up into another set of consultation, so that we collectively see that the final product is able to take us to the aim of having a better and effective coordination. With NIDM, it may also NIDM and maybe involvement of the good offices we are having on our panel today, and many others. We also see that we convert this into a training modules and able to build capacity building across the stakeholders, so that we achieve through better coordination, we achieve our larger visions of including everyone and leaving no one behind in disasters. So, with this background, today's discussion is to more inform this guideline, but also to register the important aspects of protection which we see in disasters, most especially in India. And with this, I will hand it over to Shri Anil Sinha ji for further moderation. Over to you, Anil Sinha, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vikrant, for very ably setting the context and spelling out the objectives of this intense exercise, which Sphere is undertaking on continuous and basis day to day and today back to back, leaving no time for the participants to have even lunch, you see. But anyway, that shows the seriousness, and that also shows the kind of conditions in which one may have to work in disaster situations, you see. Now, coming to the I must say namaste and good afternoon to all the participants, all the distinguished speakers. It's my privilege and honor to be really moderating all these sessions. Today morning session was very elegantly moderated by Dr. Ilya Zafar, and I am doing this. I think, as I said, let me just repeat for those who were not there earlier, is that this is a great exercise undertaken by Sphere in pre-disaster times, but then many people will say, sir, it is not pre-disaster times because we are really facing and living through one of the worst disasters, that is the pandemic. But I think given the current challenging situation, I think Sphere is making the best use of time. And it's very good because once we had the pandemic 7, 8 months, 9 months back, we also had several events of overlapping disasters, concurrent disasters, making the whole situation very, very complex, you see. And in the situation of a disaster, in the event of a disaster, coordination becomes central to the whole response, command, control, everything, you see. So coordination is very, very important. That is the importance of this exercise. If one is not able to coordinate, then a lot of efforts would go waste. Coordination would ensure that the underperformance by various stakeholders or team members are not there. Coordination will ensure that there is optimization of the performance of the resources, whether it is human or the resources, etc., etc. So that is the importance of this exercise. So I'm very happy, having spent all of my life in the public administration. And then trying to really strengthen this exercise to strengthen coordination is something very, very important, because that is what doesn't really happen. Because in any major disaster situation, large number of any major disaster situation is a multi-stakeholder engagement, multiple number of players, and which belong to not only the horizontally national to state to the district and down to the panchayat and the community levels, but also horizontally with large number of departments, which may be close to even 2 dozen or more than that, you see. And therefore, you see, as I said, pre-disaster time is the best time to plan. And in a way, that is why this exercise is very good, because once a disaster happens, then that is no time to plan. That is the time to respond, and respond as best as one can do. And you can do as best as you can do only if you have planned earlier. So, well, that is as far as the importance is concerned of the whole exercise. Coming to today's topic of protection, protection of whom? Protection, obviously, of the affected people, and within that, more so of the vulnerable people, you see, because any disaster accentuates, heightens, and enhances the vulnerability of various segments of the population. You see. And many times we say that disasters do not discriminate, you see. Disasters may not discriminate in terms of initial impact, you see, because initially it affects everyone. But in terms of the outcome or the impacts later on, I think there is discrimination. A lot of which is created by the human beings, by us. We as a society itself, we generate a lot of discrimination. See. And that this whole attempt is to understand how vulnerabilities really contribute to pushing people, depriving people, and how to really improve the whole situation. You see. Now, if we look at the legal framework, I have got the Disaster Management Act right before me. The chapter 11 and section 61. You see, the title of section 61 is Prohibition Against Discrimination. And it says that there shall be no discrimination on the ground of sex, caste, community, descent, or religion, you see, or any other. I think the spirit is that under consideration, you see. Then if we look at this is the legal framework which enunciates in clear words. Then we go to the national policy, the preamble of the national policy, which was brought out in 2009, that also prohibits and says that there will be no discrimination. It further elaborates by saying that against economically weaker section, socially marginalized section, disadvantaged section, women, elderly, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, etc., etc. So if we read it together, it's a very comprehensive kind of a coverage which has been given, you see. Now, the community and the individual's vulnerability, the individual vulnerability as well as there is a community vulnerability, that depends on social, cultural, economic, political, environmental, a whole lot of factors, you see. And the protection has to be against all those, the vulnerabilities and the discrimination which originates, or is generated by this kind of a situation, you see. First step, of course, is to identify the risk and the threats which are linked to a whole lot of factors: political factors, social factors, legal factors, economic factors, psychological factors, physical abilities of people, gender, you see, women and girls, age, people with disabilities, children in disasters, etc., etc. And therefore, there is need to understand this, and then mainstream protection in all stages, especially after the disaster, all stages after the disaster, you see. And fortunately, in our country, we have institutional mechanism. We have NHRC, National Human Rights Commission. We have National Commission for Women. We have National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. And there are now laws relating to the protection of rights and welfare of parents and senior citizens, etc., etc. You see, so this is broadly the overall framework as far as the protection and what is the need for protection, you see, which arises. So with these right now, I think I'll stop here, and maybe later on I'll make a few more remarks. But with these words, you see, may I now invite General Bindal, M.K. Bindalji, who is Executive Director of National Institute of Disaster Management, and he will be speaking on objectives of multi-stakeholder, multi-sector coordination and understanding protection in emergency. So may I now invite General Bindalji. The floor is yours, General Bindal, kindly. General Bindal, are you there?
Sir, General Bindal is not here. Maybe we can go to the next speaker.
Okay. I think General Bindal is busy. So we'll go to the second keynote address. General Bindalji, the floor is yours, General Bindal. Thank you.
So Mr. Bindal has not joined yet. Maybe you can proceed with the next speaker.
Yeah. That's what I'm doing. Thank you. The second Bindal, are you there? I think there's a lot of echo happening. I don't know why. The second keynote speaker is Ms. Sulochana Das. She is the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities in the Government of Odisha. She will be speaking on experiences of coordination for support to persons with disabilities during COVID-19 response. So, Ms. Sulochana Das, please, over to you.
Thank you, Anilji. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks to Sphere India for giving me a chance to speak in this issue. We know Odisha is a disaster-prone state, and every alternative year, we have been facing disasters like cyclone, flood, drought, etc. This year, the situation is really worse as COVID-19 was accompanied by cyclone Orphan and subsequent floods in several coastal districts. Odisha government adopted a pro-people and people-centric approach to cope with the grave situation, fighting COVID, and carry out rehabilitation and reconstruction work in areas hit by cyclone and floods. It extended full support to all the Gram Panchayats, 6,629 Gram Panchayats to take the lead in dealing with the situation at the grassroots level. I think you might know that the World Health Organization has praised the state for its efficient COVID-19 management. The role of Gram Panchayats became very crucial. As Odia people working in other states, they started running during the lockdown, keeping the emergency situation in view. Chief Minister Mr. Naveen Patnaik ji delegated the powers of district collectors to sarpanches as part of his government's proactive measures. The Gram Panchayats representatives were strongly supported by lakhs of women who were members of the women self-help group. Free kitchens were managed through the women SHGs, where older people, destitutes, and persons with disabilities specifically, they were provided foods for several weeks. These SHGs members were not only engaged in running free kitchens, but also in making masks to stop the COVID-19. Lakhs of masks made by them have been supplied to different departments and sold to the public at a very cheaper rate. Besides this, disbursement of advance pension created a very positive spirit among the persons with disabilities. You know that ex gratia of 1,000 rupees given by the central government was also provided to all the pensioners to meet the expenses during the lockdown and subsequent days. Provisions were also made for inmates and students residing in different therapy centers with special schools. They have to be dropped at their homes, and expenses, travel, transportation was also provided for this purpose. And grant aid in advance was also released to the NGOs for providing therapeutic and rehabilitation services to children and persons with disabilities and old age persons and those who are operating special schools. Residential children of therapy centers are also provided financial support during this lockdown period, and to ensure the uninterrupted services, health services and therapeutic services to children with disabilities. The therapeutic centers were also allowed to remain open up and continue services during the lockdown also. And separate homes for beggars, destitute persons with intellectual disabilities with a capacity of 500 were operationalized, and about 250 persons were accompanied during this COVID-19 crisis. Again, if we'll see the launching of online services, then the Department of SCCPD successfully implemented the extensive array of online services to provide education and psychological support to persons with disabilities and children with disabilities. if we will see that all information about COVID-19 pandemic services offered and the precautions to be made to be taken were made available in simple and accessible format, that is braille and audible tapes for persons with visual impairment, videographic materials, and sign language interpretation for persons with persons with hearing impairment as per the guidelines of the central government. During quarantine period, the most difficult period, essential support services, medical and personal assistance are also being provided to the persons with disabilities as they are facing lots of problem during that period. The government has also ordered to give priority in treatment to older persons, women, and persons with disabilities and marginalized persons in the society. I think in short, if you will see that the government has adopted a very humanitarian approach to deal with the pandemic situation, and after the cyclone Amphan and the devastating flood which occurred in the coastal districts of Odisha. But still, special attention has to be given for restoration and for their livelihood. Because during this pandemic period, lots of people, they have lost their jobs, and they're in the street now virtually. So it's the duty of the government of Odisha and the central government, and I think it's a duty of all of us to help them in reviving their livelihood. So that is these are the points I want to highlight, that we have to give emphasis on their restoration, on the restoration work and the livelihood, how they will live happily, they will live with a full dignity. I think all of us should try. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Sulochana Dasi. Madam, you have really given us a very good account of how the pandemic situation has been managed by the government of Odisha. And if I may talk of Odisha, I'm always fascinated by the state and its journey, starting from 1970 cyclone, when lakhs of people died, and then 99, the super cyclone, when 10,000 people officially died, but unofficially maybe 30,000 or so. And then coming down to these recent cyclones. You mentioned about Umphan cyclone and the Hudhud and others which have taken place in recent years. I think the state government has done tremendously. Its journey has been unbelievable, you see, where you have been able to reduce the loss of human lives to practically zero. At best one can say in single digits, you see. So hats off to you.
Okay, sir.
Your government, your Odisha State Disaster Management Authority, Odisha Revenue and Relief Department, and the leadership which has come, political leadership which has come from the top. I know before the cyclone, I think the directive was zero tolerance to human loss of life, and I think that means a lot, you see, for the formations administration down below. I am, Madam, particularly happy to know, from you that Odisha State, right from the beginning, you mentioned about adopted a people-centric approach. I think this has to be at the center of the strategy which we are going to formulate, in the guideline, you see. I think that's a very nice thing. The second thing which really pleased me was the mention of the Gram Panchayats, to take the lead. I think wonderful, because if we can really start with Gram Panchayat, it start with the PRIs and the such local bodies, urban local bodies, and there also women taking leadership through self-help groups. I think then a lot of things are taken care of. That one can be sure. You see, so then you know that you are in the safer hands. Now the therapy centers, the ensuring transportation for people who need, and uninterrupted essential services, uninterrupted health services, And then you also underscored the importance of psychological, support, you see, to people visually impaired. You see, many times these people, because they are small in numbers, you see, somehow or the other, each district, the number would be small. And while the district administration is dealing with numbers, because numbers are being chased from all the levels, then these smaller groups are likely to be left out. And that's why I'm very happy that you started and mentioned these things, and the kind of prioritization which the government did, the district administration did, the panchayat institutions did, and the overall humanitarian approach, which also included, the provision of livelihood. And finally, I think you made a very wonderful point: living happily, ensuring their happiness, and ensuring their dignity. So thank you, madam. I think it's been wonderful, short but very, very pleasing, and I think great things to learn. So namaskar and thank you so much. Kindly, I'm sure you will be available in case there are any questions you see. Now, I just want to know if General Bindal has joined.
Mr. Chinna, Paritosh here.
Okay.
Sir, General Bindal has a meeting with Ministry of Home Affairs.
Okay.
So he's unable to-
Okay. So then we'll go to the next keynote address. Mr. Jagannath, who is Joint Director in the Ministry of Women and Child Development. Yeah, I can see Mr. Jagannath. He will be speaking on enhancing disaster resilience for the women and children. See, so Dr. Jagannath, I invite you, and the floor is yours. Dr. Jagannath, please.
Good afternoon to everybody. Actually, I'm not be going to details of Women and Children Ministry because I'm working in a statutory body called CARA, Central Adoption Resource Authority, and particularly children, orphan, destitute children all over the country. We are the nodal authority, and we are a part of the Ministry of Women and Child Development. So particularly on...
Sir, can you name your organization once again? I didn't follow.
Yes, sir. This is Central Adoption Resource Authority.
Okay.
This is a statutory body, and statutory body for rehabilitation of orphan and destitute children. And we have around 470 adoption agencies within the country. And all 470 agencies, they are connected with around 5,000 childcare institutions in the country.
Okay.
And we have around, I think, maybe 10,000 children at a particular time in adoption agencies. So there are two issues I would like to, clarify. One is about the internal management, about staff, and we are all abiding by the government instructions about social distancing, and for last 6 months. So there is absolutely no issue. And now we have full attendance nowadays. The other issue is about the programmatic issue. I think that will be good to inform you that how during these 6 months we have maximum use virtual media, and we have not stopped the program. So I would like to just count a few issues. You'll be glad to know that the entire adoption program is now online. So it is almost paperless. We do from here, and there are about 24,000 parents waiting who are considered suitable, while there are around 4,000. 4 to 5,000 children legally free, and normal children are less available. So with this kind of situation, we have made the referral. Earlier, every week we used to send 2 referral twice in a week. Now we have reduced it to 1, and whatever as far as the child is concerned, from the admission, the process is like this. The child is admitted in the home, then there is medical examination, then there is the child is declared legally free by Child Welfare Committee, then the child becomes, the legal status is determined. The child becomes free for adoption, and there is the procedure is referral. Referral means sending the proposal of the child to the prospective adoptive parents, and the child profile. Of course, by that time the child profile is ready. The child profile includes the medical report of the child, the child study report also. And what happens that once the child, the referral is made, there are prospective adoptive parents and they are in the strictly queue. And the prospective adoptive parents who are, that means where the home study is complete, and they have been considered as suitable and eligible parents. So on the one hand, there are eligible and suitable parents, and on the other, there are children available for adoption. So in such kind of situation, uh, we have made even the meeting with the children, the CWC meetings and all, arranging webinars, and so that there is less physical contact with the child. But however, the I think the process is almost going normally nowadays. The other issue is that the other issue is about the documentation. Wherever required, I think in most of the cases we are emphasizing on video, virtual media, and so there is no issue as such. And apart from that, as far as training and development activities are concerned, we have we have training programs with the states, with the child welfare committees, district child protection offices, state child protection units. Then we have with the legal and counselors. So we have been for last 6 months, we have conducted around maybe 25, around 20 to 25 webinars. So on that way, we are trying to as much emphasize on virtual media so that this program should not stop. So that is that has been our effort so far. But we hope things will be further, I think, relaxed. And if you have, I think, some queries from the participants, I would be happy to respond. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannath. I think wonderful. It's been great learning. Many of us, we may have some idea about these issues and problems in the society, but I certainly, for myself, I can say that I didn't know so much of detail as to how the whole system works, what is the procedure, etc. To learn about that from you, and to learn as to how your organization, Center Adoption Resource Authority, is working, with the current challenges of the pandemic. I think it is wonderful. I'm sure all the participants, would be benefited with your address. Uh, and I'm happy to note that the total adoption process is online now, so it must be kind of transparent also.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that is really great. And this whole process of child to home to the child's freedom, and then the legal status, and then if you could elaborate a bit more on, you mentioned about adoptive parents and eligible and suitable parents. So how do you determine that? Can you please elaborate a bit?
Yeah. See, there are parents like prospective adoptive parents. So the minimum age is 25 and the maximum age is 55.
Okay.
And the provision is like that, older parents for older children. Like there are children in the category 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8 onwards, up to 18. And the parents like younger pair couples, like couples up to 90 years, composite years of 90 years, they can always go for a small child, 0 to 4 years. Similarly, their age commensurate with the age of the child. So older couple, they can, like parents having composite age between 90 to 100, they can go for a child between 4 to 8. Similarly, couple between composite age of 100, 110 up to 110, they can opt child for 8 plus.
But by composite age, you mean the sum of the age of the two parents?
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay, because otherwise I was wondering that if
Yes,
the age
yes.
is both the parents is 90 around, how will they take care of the child, you see?
Yes. So there
Okay,
is
go ahead.
one issue is that prospective adoptive parents see one thing is that they must be eligible and they must be suitable. The eligibility is as far as the age is concerned, and the suitability is determined by home study report. Home study report.
Okay.
No, there can be no adoption without a home study report. That
Oh,
is home visit. And the initially the prospective adoptive parents, they have to register online with a few documents like their identification, like a photograph, 3-4 documents. And after that, they once they register, within a period of 1 month, their home study has to be done by the social worker.
okay, so there is a visit and they really
Yes, yes,
the situation, you see.
yes. So all documents are uploaded in the system.
Okay.
So and once the home study is done and the document is uploaded in the system, so their counting starts seniority. So they can see, just like a house building, that allotment system in the government, they can see where they are. So now they can give option also. They want a male child, they want a female child, they want a child of like age also 0 to 2, 2 to 4, and they want a couple, sibling or twins. So all options are there, and accordingly, the referral is considered for them. So so it has been, and there are also other categories of children, like there is a queue for normal children. There is a queue for normal children, but there is no queue for medical children or children having special needs, and also called hard to place children, like those children who are not getting family early and children having medical problems. So such children, even the, the adoptive parents, they can reserve and they can take custody. So for them, there is no waiting period.
Okay, okay, okay.
So
Okay, thank you. I think one of the challenges which you have is to ensure that the child doesn't fall into the wrong,
yes, yes, sir. Yes,
wrong
sir.
kind of, and
Yes.
doesn't get further
Uh,
exploited, isn't it?
yes, yes,
So I
yes.
think that must be a challenge, but I'm sure you have processes.
Here are some
Yes.
results from a search.
Yeah. And then I think children with medical
Yes,
who have medical issues already, because
yes,
normal children, a lot of people will be
yes,
happy to adopt,
yes.
but a child having some kind of a morbidity,
Gee.
over there, how do
Here's
you
what I found.
motivate people to come and adopt that kind of?
Yes, yes. So you can say annually we have 4,000 adoptions approximately, out of which around 6 to 700 adoptions are outside the country, around 25 countries. So mostly you see around 600-700 children, mostly special need children, are placed in inter-country adoption by the foreigners or OCI, NRI, and mostly normal children are placed within the country. So if a child is normal or having special need, so that is determined by the by documentation, like there must be having the medical certificates, and we also have a team of AIMS medical officers in our panel, and before uploading in the system whether the child is a medical healthy child or having physical problem, our medical officer also scrutinize that. So once it is uploaded, then it has to be either uploaded as a normal child or a child having special needs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Jagannath. I think it's
Thank you.
been wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
It's a great learning, great eye opener as to what is the extent to which our government and our government institutions and institutions like yours can do. And I'm sure, it calls for the great deal of empathetic and sensitive, sensitivity in the job. And therefore, I really salute you, for
Thank
the
you,
kind
sir.
of leadership which you must be taking
Thank
along
you,
with
sir.
your team. So it's wonderful. Sorry for the
Thank you,
participants.
sir.
I took the liberty of asking some of the questions. I could not really prevent myself, but I'm sure participants would have the time to kindly put your questions in the chat box, and then we'll get back to you, sir, later on. Thank you
Okay,
so
thank
much
you.
once again. I'd say
Thank you,
it's
sir. Thank you.
God bless you with all your work, you see.
Thank you, sir.
Now the next, I'll move over to the next speaker, Shri Sahadev Singh. He is Under Secretary in the Department of Justice in the Ministry of Law and Justice and which is in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. And he will be giving his presidential address on protecting the rights during emergencies. So Shri Sahadev Singh ji, may I invite you and over to you, sir.
Mr. Sinha, Paritosh here once again. Mr. Sarade just called me saying that he's in a meeting with the JS. So he
Oh,
can't come right now, but he'll try to come during the entire meeting.
okay.
So
And
in
any
that case,
any news about General Bindal?
the General Builder is also in the meeting with
Okay, okay. So I think and anyone from NDMA, Kamal Kishore, anyone?
Mr. Kamal Kishore also said that he might come join a bit later. So in
Okay,
that case, we can go to the question and answer session. Or
okay, wonderful. So then we'll get back to Sadev Singh and Kamal Kishore later on. So with that, in fact, I would like to conclude the inaugural session, and I think it's been wonderful. You see, after the the overall context which was laid by Vikrant and the legal and the institutional kind of framework which I mentioned, to learn about some specific work in the state of Odisha which has happened, and by this Central Adoption Resource Authority from Mr. Jagannath. I think that's been wonderful in terms of focusing on some real life situations, I think that's very, very important. So I think thanks to all the speakers in this. So may I now conclude the inaugural session and hand over the session to Mr. Paritosh Mule. He is Manager Collaborating Advocacy, Sphere India. So Paritosh, please, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody, among all the panelists and our audience members here. And thank you, Mr. Sinha, so much for conducting such a, such a eye-opening session, inaugural session with our dignitaries and the panelists in this session. It is my pleasure to move on now to the panel discussion, where we will be focusing more on ensuring and understanding a bit more on how multi-sector coordination can be brought about by collaboration between the various stakeholders that we have for protection. I take this opportunity to provide a small presentation on what it is that we aim to do through the handbook before I go forward and introduce our distinguished panelists for the session. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thanks, Siljo. So the protection sector of the handbook, along with the 5 sector handbooks that have been prepared over the last 5 months, deals specifically in terms of what it is that the protection sector should do and ensure preparedness for emergency and response. As you are aware, protection aspects need to be streamlined and mainstream across all humanitarian activities, be it war sector, health sector, food and nutrition. And as a result, the team of authors that was working on this particular sector had a tremendous task in front of them, and they have achieved and they have succeeded in coming up with a very wonderful draft of the protection handbook. Similar to the other drafts, the handbook on protection sector has among itself the role and the functioning of the sector committee, so as to ensure some sort of a system in terms of what the sector will do within itself. We also look at how we can assess and monitor the situation in India, because this lies in because through this we are able to understand whether there is an emergency that is coming up. We also look at how the stakeholders can work together to develop a sector strategy so that it guides their future activities. Also, protection sector involves a lot of stakeholders from across various government ministries, departments, and agencies. And as a result, we have undertaken an exercise of mapping the key stakeholders so that we can form some sort of coordination mechanism between them. Alongside, resource mobilization stands to be one of the most critical aspects in ensuring humanitarian interventions, and protection sector is no exception to this particular need. And as a result, we have tried to identify how we can mobilize resources for this. And finally, the protection sector of the handbook concludes by working on the principles and standards that we need to uphold during emergencies and during preparedness, along with the indicators and benchmarks upon which we need to adjudicate the work that we do. So the handbook essentially comes out and examines the socio-economic factors, the caste-based factors, the rights of the elderly, the rights of the children, the rights of people with disabilities, to understand what are the needs of these individuals. And to further understand these needs, the sector handbook goes further and suggests that a situation analysis, a JNA, a data collection and analysis, and the information management of all this analysis and information should be done so that we have an idea of a holistic idea of what lies in front of us. Similarly, the strategy and the stakeholders and the resource mobilization parts of the chapter looks at who, what, when, how, and where. These are the key questions that the strategy aims to answer so as to ensure that there is a multi-stakeholder approach. The handbook not only addresses a strategy to deal with the ongoing emergency, but also comes up with a contingency plan in case of any future emergencies, while at the same time, it undertakes an exercise of mainstreaming protection across all sectors. In terms of stakeholder coordination, we were delighted to have the presence of Mr. Jagannath, because the childcare systems across India stand to be a very key stakeholder in terms of ensuring protection of children, along with constitutional bodies such as the NHRC, HHRC, the National Commission for Women, the National Commission for Minorities, the National Commission for SCs and STs. And these are some of these stakeholders with which we need to engage in future to ensure protection during emergencies. In addition, we look at what sort of resource mobilization strategies could be adopted, which includes flash appeals, bilateral or multilateral funding, and at the same time, keeping a track of the financial resources that we're receiving so as to ensure that we can hold ourselves accountable to the funding that we receive. In addition, we also look at what sort of human resources and strategies we need to mobilize to ensure protection can be addressed. And finally, the handbook ends with guiding principles, indicators, and benchmarks, wherein we are looking at what are the 6 core values of protection, the 3 major principles, that is prevention, response, and remedy, which have been added. We also look at how advocacy and protection mainstream can be done so as to protect ourselves and so as to protect the vulnerable sections of the society. And finally, the handbook illustrates the indicators to develop protection strategies based on dangers, physical violence, sexual violence, psychological distress, things like that. In conclusion, the handbook provides benchmarks to ensure context-specific indicators in protection response. So this has been the exercise that has been undertaken by the very eminent authors that we have amongst ourselves today, and some of them who are attending as part of audience. So I take this opportunity to delve further into understanding what are the needs and what is it that we can do regarding multi-stakeholder coordination for this. It is my very immense pleasure to invite to this panel discussion Dr. Rajinder Walia. Dr. Walia is the assistant professor at NIDM, National Institute of Disaster Management, and she has a PhD in sociology and has joined NIDM since the last 17 years. Prior to this, she had worked at Khalsa College, Ludhiana, and she has a very keen interest in various social issues of disasters, such as gender and the needs of children in disasters, community-based disaster preparedness, and disaster mental health preparedness, etc. Dr. Walia, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this floor, and I hand the mic over to you for you to address. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Rajinder, you are audible.
Yes, sir. So I would like to share a couple of slides on the risk factors for women and children. So if I can have the share screen option with me. Just a second.
Doctor, you can share your screen.
Yeah. So is the presentation visible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I would like to, talk about the risk factors for women and children in emergency. And
Make it full screen, please.
yes, sir. I guess it's a full screen, sir, now.
Now, yes, now.
Yeah. So, as we all know, that emergencies shatter livelihoods of communities, which have an implication on the protection of women and children in short term as well as long term. So, in the immediate aftermath, what happens is that if people are not busy, they tend to engage in activities which threaten the protection of women. And as we all know, that an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So, the non-engagement of communities in immediate aftermath of emergencies, it creates an environment which threatens the safety and security of women and children. So in the long run, if we see that the shattered livelihoods, if they're not restored, it gives an opportunity to traffickers to force the women and children into the networking of trafficking there. The second point of service delivery, if we see that the accessibility, location, and timings of service delivery mechanisms, if they're not done in a sensitive manner, can create further safety and security issues. If it is done far away from the relief camps, not done or not carried out in broad daylight, it can further worsen conditions. It should be ensured that the more vulnerable group has access to the delivery of services. Otherwise, their vulnerability can be used as a tool for exploitation under such circumstances. Anecdotal evidence also shows that alcohol consumption increases after a disaster. This can lead to aggressive behavior, which can result in all forms of violence against women and children, threatening their protection rights. A community exercises an informal control over its members in normal times. But during emergency, it is seen that when such informal control is lost, it encourages the antisocial elements to make use of the situation and engage in activities which threaten the safety and security of women and children. If we come to the next point, the constitution of committees, whatever committees are constituted, formal, informal, in the aftermath of an emergency, if it is not gender balanced, it can be used by certain overrepresented sections to exploit the other section in exchange of favors. Sexual exploitation is an offshoot of such concentration of powers in the hands of particular section of the society. And hence, to take care of the protection, we need to see that the whatever committees are constituted, they are gender balanced in nature. The destruction of infrastructure, which includes lack of proper lighting, unsafe toilets, again threaten the protection of women in the relief camps. And the psychosocial care, PFA stands for psychological first aid, because in the immediate aftermath of emergency, it is only the psychological first aid that is given. And later on, after about 3 months or so, we switch over to the psychosocial care. Now, the psychosocial care, which is targeted towards women and children, excludes men who are also feeling frustrated after an emergency, and they're not able to ventilate their feelings due to the process of socialization that is involved. This repressed frustration of women can easily vent out on women and children through violence against them. And hence, it can also kind of, we need to look out for protection of women and children in this regard as well. And finally, as it has happened in the current pandemic, the violence against women increased, but the reporting and redressal mechanisms like police and judiciary, they were too occupied with the COVID surveillance. Similarly, in other emergencies, it also happens that the law and order agencies are diverted towards the management of emergencies, and hence the protection rights of women and children are not prioritized. So this also needs to be taken care of, because if we look at these risk factors, we'll be able to identify which are the different organizations who need to coordinate for eliminating the risk factors for women. Now, if we go to the next slide, which talks about the risk factors for children, studies show that the emergencies can create stress and affect the reproductive health of women. And we know the risk factors for children are also overlapping to a certain extent with risk factors for women. There's an increase in abortions and preterm deliveries and other complications in maternal health. So if the maternal health is poor, it can lead to the birth of children who have a poor health. The protection of health is endangered here. We talk of child malnutrition. We all know that children depend upon their security providers, be it their family, for food, clothing, and shelter. However, in emergencies, they may lose their family. They may have to struggle for food and shelter, which can further cause malnutrition or undernutrition for children. Moreover, with the midday meal schemes being stopped, it further hampers the nutrition of children there. If we talk of child labor and child trafficking, both are linked, because the shattered livelihoods of parents can push the children into child labor, and it can also push them into the networks of human trafficking, because after an emergency, people are confused, they are panicked, they don't know what is happening, they don't know how to arrange the finances, and traffickers are able to lure such, victims into the network of trafficking very easily. We come to the next point, which talks of child dropouts, with schools being destroyed or being used as a shelter. The right to education is threatened. Children tend to drop out from schools. And we also need to understand that emergencies disrupt the routines of vaccination and immunization. And currently, for example, even in pandemics, if we see, the health infrastructure is so overwhelmed by the COVID surveillance. So it has endangered the progress made by a country in the prevention of diseases through vaccination and immunization. And a lot of health organizations, a lot of health agencies, they are, raising a lot of hue and cry about the progress that can be lost on account of protection from diseases. We've already discussed about how, a lot of factors they contribute towards violence against women, and domestic violence is a part of violence against women. But saying that, domestic violence is only, restricted to partners will be incorrect. In a family, the domestic violence will have its repercussions on children as well. And to top it all, children experience mental health issues after emergencies, but unlike adults, they're not able to express their feelings. The process of the ventilation has to be carried out through different techniques. So the mental health of the children also, it takes a setback. And hence the various sectors which are at risk and which need protection are that we talk of, the physical health of, is one, the health of the health sector, which includes the physical and mental health. We talk of, reproductive health of women, malnutrition, immunization, which refers to physical health. In mental health, we talk of mental health of men, women, and children, and men are an important stakeholder in mental health. The education sector is at risk with children dropouts, the cessation of midday meal schemes, which prevents them from taking nutrition. The livelihood sector is at risk, which, if shattered, can lead to violence against women and it can also push women and children into human trafficking. And 80% of the victims of human trafficking are women and children. The security sector, with respect to infrastructure like lightings, toilets, we've already discussed. Access of services is at risk. If it is not done well, it can create an environment of exploitation with power vested in the hands of certain people who would ask for certain favors in exchange of sexual exploitation. The reporting and redressal mechanism for addressing protection issues, it should be made a part of essential service. Even in this pandemic, we saw how the police, the judiciary, they were all, preoccupied with, the COVID surveillance. And hence, and on the other hand, the organizations, National Commission of Women were saying that, the violence against women is rising. And women were, they were talking of, how they are in lockdown with their own abusers. But the reporting and redressal mechanism, if not made a part of essential service, it will have its impact on the protection for women and children. And finally, we talk of, the representation of, all sectors of stakeholders, a gender balanced representation in all formal and informal committees. It has to be there in order to avoid sexual exploitation and other forms of violence against the stakeholders. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Walia, for such a beautiful presentation. I think what you've essentially highlighted here, in addition to the risk that every individual's vulnerable section faces, is the sociological aspects of disasters that we face normally, something that goes unnoticed. Your point on the various informal power structures within a society is definitely an eye-opener. And your final slide definitely speaks about how protection needs to be mainstream across sectors. You've spoken about education, you've spoken about livelihood, access to services, which includes food, the health repercussions of the emergencies on women and children, and definitely the watch aspects as well. So as we can see, the protection aspects are clearly cross-cutting and needs to be further, further stressed upon and further worked upon when we are coming up with sector-specific strategies. I thank you once again for your brilliant presentation, ma'am. Moving forward, and thank you for keeping it so crisp.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving forward, we move on to Mr. Shekhar Chaturvedi ji. Mr. Shekhar Chaturvedi ji is the Assistant Professor at National Institute of Disaster Management. He has a postgraduate with diploma in computer applications. He has been associated with the institute for more than 20 years. His major areas of interventions are disaster management plans, community-based disaster preparedness, incident response system, and accident-related disasters, particularly railway accidents. Mr. Shekhar Chaturvedi ji, it's a pleasure to have you as panelist in this session, and I hand the floor over to you so that you may further go on to discuss, in particular, the aspect of addressing protection issues in emergency response. Thank you, Vincent.
So, thank you, Paritosh, for giving me this opportunity to be a part. So, can I share the presentation? Just few slides.
Please, sir, please go ahead.
Yeah, so my topic of presentation is addressing protection issues in emergency response. So when we talk of emergency response, it comes in the major portion of this, the issues has been covered by Dr. Walia in a very elaborate way. So I'll not be going into that detail, but yes, I'll be working on. These are the sectors which are to be addressed: the child, woman, old ages, differently abled. So protection basically of this issues that she has already highlighted. I'm just once again reiterating those. The injuries, protection from the injuries, sexual violence, exploitation, psychosocial distress, trafficking, domestic violence, which say increases as she has rightly mentioned about the increase in the alcohol consumption and all that. Then also due to psychosocial distress, also this domestic violence increases. The health issues of old age, and then we talk about the support system that usually in the time of COVID was a big question mark for the differently abled people, that how their support system, because they are mainly dependent on support system for their daily things. So that support system is also to be protected when we talk of the protection. So when addressing the issues, it's just basically what we feel that it should be timely medical attention and medical action to address the injuries, because the study shows that if the injuries are not tackled in a right time, then it aggravates and it can lead to certain major disabilities. The self in terms of when we talk of say protection of the women and all that and children, the self-help groups can be utilized in terms of helping the addressing the issue of protection to the children in times of say relief camps, and also women. They can also address men and the financial issues which are also to be protected. The psychosocial care, the externalization and the spiritualization of the issues, that is a major way how we can address the psychosocial issues, because children as well as the old ages, as well as in the time of COVID, we see that although we had protected them from the outside world, keeping them in the house, but engaging them in the in different activities was a major challenge. So the effect on the mindset, effect on the mental health of children as well as the old age was a big question mark. So that we are protecting from the outer world, but how to address that issue was a major challenge. So associated activities, that is externalization that I was talking about. So keeping their mind diverted from going into the distress mode is what we should be addressing, and keeping them engaged in other associated activities which are say you can say that which are their own acceptance activities. That is what is needed when we are addressing the issues. For differently able, the protection of the support system is what is needed. If we can't protect the support system, then the differently abled people becomes their protection becomes very difficult. So documentation at the relief camp is very much important, because if we have a proper documentation of all people, the people who have come in, people who are to be addressed, people say the head count, etc., that we saw at the time of tsunami and all that. So that is what is needed while we are addressing these protection issues, which can say help us in avoiding the trafficking and the other related issues. See, the engagement in associated activities such as craft making, lamp making, or other activities is what is needed when we talk of addressing the issues of the protection. Others say other if we say get them talking to their loved ones or near ones, or get associated them with locating their near ones and loved ones, that can address a major issue of the impact on the mental health of the people. And also the we talk of Odisha super cyclone again. Dr. Sinha was also talking about this. Madam Sulochana was also talking about Odisha. So Odisha in 99 had a very good system of associating the mothers who had lost their child with the orphans, so that they both of them get along and address their own psychosocial issues. The adoption system we were talking of, Dr. Jagannath was telling about the child adoption system and the association of the people of the orphans or the old aged ones with somebody whom they can talk to and whom they can associate with, is how we can address the issues. And with this, what we can say that these were some of the issues. And in the morning session, we were talking of that it has a legal and policy backing. The Act protects and supports these the rights. The Constitution also talks about life with dignity. Article 21 of Constitution of India talks of right to life, which has which has encompassed now the right against sexual harassment, right against clean environment, right to be informed about various issues, right against illegal detention, legal aid, compensation. All this has been associated with Article 21 now, in addition to right to life with dignity. The policy, Dr. Sinha was telling in the morning session, that policy also talks about backs what Act says. So we have a legal backing of the protection of these sectors. So maybe we have certain addressing issues, and we have certain legal backing which can help us addressing the issues. So thank you very much with this. So over to you, Paritosh.
Thank you, Mr. Chaturvedi, for this brilliant presentation. I think what you've really highlighted is that whenever we are advocating for emergencies, we come from a background of rights rather than asking for favors or handdowns. So I think that's an approach that protection agencies should be taking forward, and they do, definitely, for sure. But in addition, so should other agencies which do not necessarily work on protection. You also clearly highlighted what are the various stakeholders that we can engage with in ensuring protection, and I've emphasized on the need to engage people who have just faced or who have come out of any recent disaster, so as to this engagement not only helps them in ensuring their safety and protection, but also helps them mitigate and deal with the trauma and the mental health issues that they would be facing in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. You have also elaborated and taken the example of the Odisha state government's initiative in pairing up mothers who have lost their children to emergencies and children who have become orphan as a result of disasters. I think such case studies definitely do help us put things into perspective and put some abstract protection ideas into a bit more visualized way. You've also elaborated a lot more, and in the morning also you did that, which is the legal backing for all the protection issues that we take. And that definitely goes a long way in saying that raising awareness on protection agenda should not be only limited to disasters, but that should be something that can be incorporated in all development activities, so that when we are faced with a disaster, we know what are our rights. So thank you once again, Mr. Chaturvedi, for that really nice presentation. And you sit along as we wait for questions that will come.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaturvedi. I now hand over the floor to Commander Ashok. Commander Ashok has been serving as the Regional Director for South Asia International Justice Mission. He is an alumnus of the 94th National Defense Academy and has had a decorated career with the armed forces, where he commanded warships, led highly sensitive transnational missions of the highest order, among other distinguished roles. Commander Ashok ji has been fighting for human rights and has been combating against trafficking crime syndicates for the past few years, has been directly involved in issues of rescue over the 3,600 women and children from bondage of human slavery in the last 3 years. He has been working in 10 states in India in collaboration with police and judiciary, and we are honored to have him with such rich experience in protection issues represented on this panel. Mr. Commander Ashokji, I welcome you once again to the panel discussion and hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Paritosh. I want to thank you for setting a lovely introduction. I appreciate your kind words. I also was enjoying the inaugural session that was so beautifully moderated by Shri Anil Kumar sir. It's an amazing to just listen to him speak with his wealth of knowledge and the way he moderated, along with the two speakers, both Joint Director Jagannath and Sulochana Madam. It's amazing to listen. And my co-panelists who took the first two sessions, thank you to them. They've almost set the stage, and therefore I can just run it through. So maybe I'll take about 6 or 7 minutes as I move forward to stick to the topic. The topic that I'm going to speak to you is understanding the role of stakeholders in ensuring protection during emergency. Don't consider this word, don't misunderstand this word emergency. I'm talking about disaster and preparedness and the response that is needed as we move forward. For this particular presentation, I've looked at 3 documents. One is already what is there on the chat box by Sphere India, an amazing document design. I read through it. I also looked at the UN DRR document, which is about 46 pages that has come out. Beautiful document. Plus, I also used another resource for my conversation by a book written by Gary Hogan named Locus Effect, which predominantly dedicates 4 chapters of his book on protection of women and children and how communities are built safe and well looked after when women and children looked after. So these are three basically runs that I'm going to take you through. In case you're wondering where did I pick up my conversation, these are the 3 resources that you can go back and look at it. Let me just give you the first set of my opening conversation. All of them talk about a comprehensive approach. And this needs not a singular or a linear approach. This needs a comprehensive approach. I know there are beautiful acronyms designed for this, but what are these comprehensive approaches protecting? They're all protecting what my co-panelists talked about, risk against women and children, including men, but predominantly risk against women and children becoming more and more vulnerable. And therefore, the comprehensive approach of protection is spelled out as PPRR. That is the acronym used, which is prevention. Another word or a synonym for prevention could be mitigation. And then preparedness towards disaster, which are on 2 extremes, the apex ends of our rhombus. And then the lower end of the rhombus comprises of recovery and response. So this is what a comprehensive approach model in a protection would look like. To comprehensive approach to disaster management comprises of these 4 things that I've called out: prevention, preparedness, response, recovery. I cannot cover each one of them in detail because the time allotted to me is extremely small, but you can go back and read these 3 books that I've told you, and you will get adequate resources on what I'm talking to you. To ensure a balance between reduction of risk, that is one part of the story, but enhancing a community's resilience. That's the key. As much as we reduce the women and children's risk, we cannot sustain it unless we create an enhancement of a community resilience while ensuring effective response and recovery capabilities are built within the system. That's a primary job of stakeholders. The 4 phases that I've called out, which is PPRR as an acronym, are not linear in any way, nor are they independent of the others. They do overlap, and they overlap significantly. Recovery activities, for example, are likely to begin during the responsive stage, and mitigation strategies may be considered during a recovery stage. So at different stages, each one of them kicks in, and a stakeholder's maturity to handle this will ensure that we create a resilient community which is capable of ensuring that they're responsive and they're built well during disasters. Who are the stakeholders? That's my topic. And the books that I've read calls out 3. Calls out institutional stakeholders and laws. In the subsequent slides, I'll just run through you, give you a small snapshot of each one of them. Then there are protective initiators and systems, which are also stakeholders. And then you have police structures or policy structures or police infrastructure, which is called the criminal justice system. But all of them merge together at the apex with NGOs. NGOs is a word I've used, but civil society organizations and NGOs continue to be the apex that governs, drives, and ensures that stakeholders are moving in the right direction of building a safe and a secure community in every part, especially during disasters. Some of the points were called out by Dr. Ajender, beautifully spelled out. She went from the extremes of exploitation to even not having adequate lighting could cause a great disaster in the community. Beautifully brought out by her presentation. And the center of the stakeholder continues to be a civil society driven momentum. I'm calling this out very carefully for those who are listening to you. If you take out this apex, then the points mentioned by my previous speaker, Mr. Shekhar, it would be difficult to maintain dignity. It's very difficult to maintain the rights, fundamental rights become violated. As long as a civil society continues to be the apex of it, I would say our recovery and the stakeholder management during disasters becomes robust and also sustainable as we move forward. So some of the stakeholders that are called out, just for your academic interest, NHRC called out by even Shri Anil Kumar sir called out this morning, okay, the NCW, the NCPCR, the Maintenance and Welfare Parents and Senior Citizens Amendment Act, and the role order that is passed for the system. These are some of the stakeholders that you can look at, institutional stakeholders. Some of the police structures, anti-human trafficking, which is exclusive for human trafficking elements. Local police units need to be more robust and more active. Women police stations and units have been set up in a couple of states, and it is time for us to see that it is uniformly distributed across the country, end to end. Juvenile justice units, are there one in a district or maybe two in a district? That is inadequate in disasters. We need more of SJPU units as we move forward. Okay, Railway Protection Force is one of the largest known force that is available, and this can prevent against exploitation, which is specific to human trafficking. They even have a mandate, RPF has a mandate to ensure that they intercept victims of human trafficking as part of their work. Protective initiatives in juvenile justice systems, these are all called up. ICPS is one of them, and KARA, which is so beautifully called out by Mr. Jagannath. He explained to us this morning. I'm not going to deliberate. And then we have a lot of childcare institutions as part of the stakeholders. Well, now when I talk about NGOs or civil society organizations, I want to put this slide across to you. The nonprofit works with all stakeholders in tandem. And I want to maybe take some time, maybe a minute or so on this to give you what I'm talking about and what would be the outflow in the community. When you push civil society organization into the protection, they end up protection, which is providing relief to the victims of disaster and assisting the poor. You can define poor by the way you want to define it. You can use an MPI, or you could use it at GDP, whatever you want to take it, however you define. I define, in the case of the recent COVID-19, we had people standing in queues for a bottle of water for even 45 minutes. That is something, a concern for us as a nation. So if the government organizations and the stakeholders and the NGOs move in, the result would be we will be able to give man a fish. But that doesn't stop there. Stakeholder management doesn't stop there. It moves to the next. It almost slides over to the next, the prevention part. This reduces people's vulnerability through income and diversification savings. What does it produce at a community? It teaches the man to fish. Do we stop there and say, well, we've done the prevention protection? No, I think we should move on to the next stage of promotion. It increases people's chances and opportunities. I would say it in a human trafficking language, many of them will become champions of the community. They're right now survivors. They have to move to a place of becoming champions, which means they learn to organize a fishermen's cooperative society as an illustration. And the end of the whole cycle would be transformation. Redressing social, political, economic exclusion, oppression. Some of these questions have come up in the chat. Some of you are asking these questions. Transformation protects the fishing and also protects the fishing rights. I've just used fishing as an example, an analogy for you to take you through. When all the four kick in, then the stakeholder management in protecting the lives of women and children who are vulnerable during pandemic or any kind of disaster will become robust, and it would be sustainable as we move forward. Let me just give you a few recommendations as I come to the, first of all, the first recommendations I would like to look at is communities need to be linked with local government. I'm calling this out aloud, my friends, those of you listening. It's time that communities are linked with local governments. Gone are the days when the orders were issued and community was asked to execute. Now education and the sensitivity and the awareness increased, and therefore it's very, very important that we talk this language and even speak this language, propagate this language, that communities need to be linked with a government system, local government.
Thank you, Commander Ashok. I think that was a brilliant presentation. I think you've delved deep into academic research, and at the same time, you've borrowed from your rich experience of working in protection issues. And I think we've all benefited from the various metaphors that also you use in terms of fishing, teaching a man to fish, giving him a fish, promoting his rights, and then ensuring that his rights are upheld. I mean, these kind of analogies do help us into visualizing further into what you've actually, this helps us into visualizing what are the abstract ideas of protection, and I think that really helps us moving forward. I think you have also stressed a lot on the PPRR project and the PPRR approach to emergencies, and I think that's something that should be incorporated in the handbook as well. I think that's, thank you for pointing it out, and we'll make sure that we do it moving forward. At the same time, I think this is something that is not addressed adequately enough, that the role of NGOs in ensuring protection mechanism is upheld, is definitely more vital in protection than in other sectors that we face. Say, for example, in shelter and wash, in other sectors, we do know the prominence of government agencies in looking after practically everything. While here, in fact, it is up to the NGOs, the civil society in the protection sector, to uphold the government to the standards that they claim out with or they come out with. So thank you for elaborating on the role of NGOs in this. I think you also elaborated on something that we perhaps have missed out on, which was the importance of local government in ensuring protection of vulnerable population. I think you've rightly said that, and it has been elaborated a bit more in the previous sector committees, where in fact everybody has stressed on the importance of the district administration as the first unit when it comes to facing an emergency. And I think you've gone further deeper in understanding the role of village areas in terms of the PRIs, the Panchayati Raj institutions, or the ULBs in ensuring protection of agencies. I think that's a suggestion that we will be incorporating in the handbook moving forward. And you also brought in the aspect of accountability to affected population. I think this is something that we need to uphold and we need to put into practice. Even when it comes to the handbook, we definitely need to go down to the grassroots level and take comments from affected population to ensure that this handbook lies in line with their needs and with the requirements. Thank you once again. You've also focused on, in terms of the stakeholders that could be looked after, you've focused on the importance of coalitions and of networks, of civil societies, of community-based organizations, and of volunteers. I think that's an aspect that we should incorporate in the sector strategy part of this handbook, and also the stakeholder part. That's something that we've missed out on. And that's definitely something that will come in real handy when emergency strikes. I think, yeah, at least from in the recent experience when we saw Delhi violence, the riots in Delhi, we had individuals coming up from corners of Delhi all the way to Northeast Delhi and giving their utmost to ensure that relief is provided to the affected population. And that is the case in practically all emergencies where such coalitions, networks, and informal groups of individuals come forth and provide the first site of relief to affected population. I think that's something that should be incorporated along with the other aspects that you've elaborated upon. Thank you, Commander Ashok, once again for this really beautiful presentation. It was a pleasure hearing to you. Next, we are happy to have Ms. Lee McQueen, who was the DRR specialist from National Campaign on Dalit and Human Rights, as our panelist. Lee has also been the lead author for the protection sector of the handbook, and I think Lee, you would also be delighted by hearing to the variety of panelists we've had today. To give you a bit more introduction of what Lee is, Lee has been up to. So Lee has been working in NCDHR for the past several years. She is a humanitarian practitioner with around 14 years of experience and counting in the field of social inclusion, protection of rights of marginalized communities, particularly Dalits and Adivasis in disaster response and risk reduction. She was also the main author of the study of equality in aid, which remains a vital document towards addressing identity-based inequalities in DRR. So Lee, it's a pleasure to have you amongst us today, and we look forward to hearing from you as you address the particular topic of ensuring that protection is integrated within the various sector preparedness and response strategies. Lee, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paritosh. So I'll turn on my video just for a while so that you could see me. And then because of the bandwidth issues, I'll turn it off now. Yeah, so thanks, Paritosh, for this introduction. You are very generous with your words. Thank you. And to come to the topic of my presentation, and I'll be it's about integrating protection. And normally we always receive and we say integrating DRR into all the sectors that we do, all the work, all the thematic areas. This time, we felt that it is important that we bring in the focus on protection and how do we really integrate and gradually mainstream protection concerns into various thematic areas of our humanitarian work. And here, before I start off with my comments and reflections and some recommendations, I would like to reiterate the opening remarks from Anil Sinha ji, and it was very inspiring because he actually spoke, which is not always spoken on every platform, if not a protection webinar or meeting happens.
Lee, I think we seem to have lost you. Lee has been facing some network issues, so I think we can just hold on as she comes back. Lee, are you back? I can see you among the audience members here. luckily. Yeah, no problem. Lee has some network issues, so she is joining back. But in the meantime, it is my pleasure to welcome the next panelist for this panel discussion, Mr. Simanchal Patnaik ji, who is the Program Officer, Risk and Resilience in UNICEF, in the West Bengal unit of UNICEF. Mr. Simanchal here will be representing the Office of Risk and Resilience in the UNICEF, and he specializes particularly in program management and in human resource management. And also along with that, he has specialized in government liaising when it comes to issues of child protection and child security. Mr. Commander Ashok, Mr. Simanchal, it's a pleasure to have you here amongst us, and I hand over the floor to you. We look forward to hearing from you as you go on to elaborate a bit more on how it is that we can strengthen and ensure child protection during emergencies. Mr. Patnaik, over to you.
Thank you, Paritas. Can you hear me? Is it clear? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Hello?
Mr. Patnaik, you're audible.
Okay, thank you for... Thank you. Yeah. Think... Hello? Okay. Good afternoon, all of you. Good afternoon, Alin Silna sir. It's my pleasure to be I really honor Anil Sinha sir. I have already worked under him in Bihar State Disaster Management Authority under the UNDP program. So it's really a great opportunity again to meet him as well as the entire team. So my topic today is regarding how we can strengthen the child protection in emergencies. Thanks, Paritos, for giving my introduction. But in fact, my experience start with disaster management since 2001 after super cyclone. So since then, I worked in different state and experienced different type of disaster, different level of disasters where we coordinated with many departments, many organizations, also with the communities. First, in effective manner. While working with UNICEF, I also got the chance to work in the child protection sector because these are the core in UNICEF. And while working in the DRR, we always focus on these sectors. In that case, in West Bengal, actually we work in child protection in emergency. We actually planned a certain capacity building program starting from state to district and up to the block level. Main focus was how we can bring the coordination mechanism established with the child protection sector as well as the disaster management sector. Because in the state like West Bengal and also even in many states, so there are cadre of officials, there are cadre of networks of civil society organizations on child protection as well as on the DRR. So if we really want to strengthen this topic, this particular area, child protection in emergency, it speak about the child protection as well as the emergency situation. So here the coordination among these two group of people, two group of officials is very much important. So that's what I experienced in West Bengal while developing training capacity building strategy. So what we did actually, we developed the training module based on the training need assessment carried out from state level up to the community level, and we found there is a gap. If you see the Tyson sector, a network called Chain Network. Basically, the civil society organizations were focusing on the child protection sector. They work there. There is another group, the interagency group, the civil society organization group, who basically focus on the humanitarian response as well as emergency. So we thought if we can establish the linkage with these two groups, then the purpose will be solved to actually sort out certain issues related to two civil society group who work in two different sectors, and when we combine this to address the emergency issues related to child protection, it's really work very well. In the meantime, we also found there are government officials, functionaries who work especially for the child protection sector, starting from state child protection unit, district child unit, block. Many office, uh, the meantime, there are also disaster management institutional setup according to which there are disaster management officials at the state level, and then you can find the disaster management officials in the block level. So combining all these government officials and the civil society organization, we develop the strategy and develop the child protection in emergency training module, and then carried out the learn about what is child
Mr.
protection,
Patnaik?
how it actually handle in an emergency situation. Yeah. Yes.
Nee, Mr. Patnaik, your voice is breaking up.
Hello.
Yeah. Please continue.
Okay, I think there's some network problem. Okay.
Please continue.
I was talking about that how. Okay. Thank you. So I was continuing about the how we can combine these two group of civil society organization, two group of government officials together to learn about each other topic. Like the disaster management officials should also understand about what are the child protection issues and how it further aggravate in an situation. Child protection related civil society organization, which we call the Childline Network, also need to understand that how to work in an emergency situation, what are the protocols, what are the process we follow, what are the disaster management planning process. If we understand these two things, then the work will be simpler. So that is the way actually we thought that how to strengthen the child protection in emergency, especially in the state like West Bengal. Now coming to the topic, I just wanted to elaborate what are the child protection, what are the risks that especially in emergency. All of us know.
Mr. Patnaik, now we've lost you completely.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's audible. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, Mr. Patnaik.
Okay. Is my screen is visible?
It is visible. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So these are the few issues, risks where children remain actually isolated in an emergency situation. And this situation also exists in a normal condition. But when emergency occurred or when any disaster occur, so it further aggravate because normally our law and order situation compromised, then are engaged otherwise, then the people are affected in the communities, have lost their support system. So that then all these issues further aggravate. I mean to say that child protection risk and child protection deprivations are already existing, but it further aggravate in an emergency. So that's why we need to understand where the risk and where to address this risk. I think we all understand what is child protection in emergency. This is a simple definition. It's about preventing and responding to the violence, abuse, exploitation, and neglect of children during the time of emergency. So this is a lesson. Then what are the steps we need to actually take to overcome this problem? So I divide it in 4 phases. First step is the child safeguarding. Second is prevention. Then the protective response and the restorative. I think many of these terms are already discussed by us.
Mr. Patnaik, we seem to have lost your voice again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we've lost your screen sharing though.
Okay, I think some network problem from my side. Yeah, it's fine.
We can't see your screen just yet.
Can you see now? Okay.
I can't see it yet. Siljo, can you confirm if you can see Mr. Patnaik's screen?
No, sir, it's not visible for me too. Yeah, it's coming now. Just
Sorry for the interruption. I think the network at my level is very poor. Uh, can you see now?
Yes,
Should I
yes, it's
continue?
visible.
Yeah. So regarding do no harm to the children, because when we are talking about the emergencies, there are many no stakeholders, many organizations working in different sector. So if we actually understand this concept that do no harm to the children, so whatever the work we are doing, whether we are involved in the rescue process, whether we are involved in the relief process, we need to be very much sensitive about the children, that where are the children and how we should protect them, and response and relief activities by protecting the children. We shouldn't be very aggressive in distributing the relief, and we don't need to and don't understand the sensitivity of the children. So that way we need to be very much careful that how we will consider the children should have no harm whatever the activities we are doing in an emergency situation. So this is called the safeguarding. So safeguarding, this concept need very much clear among all those who are working in an humanitarian situation. Second, when we are talking about the prevention part, so prevention is if you want to prevent the child protection issues in an emergency situation, so we need to build the capacity of all those people who involved in this process, whether it is disaster management, whether it is from the general administration or any other sector. So all these human resource need to be enhance their capacity to understand what are the existing issues related to the child protection and how we should address those issues in an emergency situation. So that way, so we have to either build some specialized human resource, or we build the capacity of the existing human resources. Then coming to the next is the identification of vulnerable children. In disaster management planning, what we do risk analysis, hazard analysis, vulnerability analysis. So while doing all those analysis, we also need to be very much careful that how we are doing that analysis for the children. Who are the children staying in the low-lying area? Who are the children who are staying in the lowest economic group? So if we can just identify those volunteer children's in the vulnerable locations, so then only it will be easy for us to address their problems. Then communicating and building the awareness. As one of our member mentioned about the community engagement. So community engagement can only be successful if we build the capacities through different type of awareness campaigns. So what are the messages, what are the communication strategies we will develop so that people will be aware about the protection related issues and the do's and don'ts what they need to do in an emergency situation with respect to the protection of the children. Similarly, engaging the children in preparedness. This is a very vital point. Actually, normally we develop the community planning, we do the risk analysis, we develop the disaster management planning, also no capacity building planning. So in all these processes, if we don't involve the children, then we are lagging behind. So we have to factor children be a part of all this preparedness, prevention, and mitigation process. They should raise their voice. They should speak out their own problems, and then based on their problems and capacities, we can frame out that by be established in a system. Information management, of course, which is very important in all type of emergency, whether it is related to natural disaster, any pandemic situation. So unless until get the information sharing from both the sides, so it cannot be updated about the situation and we cannot think of the response activities. Then child protection monitoring, which is also very important. We are very so many institutions, as already mentioned by different members, and all these institutions have a role, clear role, that how they should monitor the child protection issues in the normal time, and then they also need to focus in an emergency situation what would be the monitoring process. Then coordination is already discussed. Coordination is required, and as I have given the example, there are civil society organization in both the sector, there are government officials in both the sector of disaster management and emergency management, and also the child protection. So how we build among this group to actually effectively work in the field of child protection in emergency. Then the child protection in emergency response. What are the response?
Mr. Patnaik, if I may request you to,
yeah.
If I may kindly request you to conclude in the next 1 minute.
Sure. So this is the, I think, let me actually conclude here. The child protection response, normally when we talk about the response, it start with assessment. Any emergency occurred, to understand about the situation, the level of response of activities be required, we have to do the assessment. So and also government to understand the current situation and then accordingly plan the response. Then shelter and emergency center. So these are the few points where children take shelter with their parents, sometimes without their parents, because of the large evacuation. Sometimes children are separated from their parents. So how we address those issues at that point, relief while distributing the relief, the requirement of the children, the sensitivity of the children, so the relief package should be made accordingly. Then the mental health, which is very vital part in an emergency situation. Actually, children get shocked. They mentally actually lose their no support of the parents. So then we need to provide them that mental support. So that is mental and psychological support to survive from that particular situation. Then going to recovery, that how we can consider the service and the facilities for the children so that they can recover to the normal situation. And then coming to long-term situation, we have to consider how we can mention child protection in other development programming or in the management. Then next is advocacy and coordination, which is also part of the process throughout the response, preparedness and education. And then DRR. DRR, of course, we always talk about the long-term approach, how to reduce the risk. If you know there are risks related to child protection, how we will address in our existing program, in our existing schemes, and how we can actually plan for a long-term, short-term up to reduce the risk of related to the protection. I think these are the few things we consider so we can strengthen the child protection in emergencies. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this scope. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Patnaik. I think that was a very elaborate presentation in terms of what are the steps that we need to currently undertake to ensure protection of child during emergencies. I think one aspect that we face difficulties in emergencies especially is having a very well-defined process in terms of the check boxes that we need to tick mark so as to get things done. And I think what your presentation highlighted was this very essence process, elaboration on the process of child protection during emergencies. And I think if you would share it with us, the presentation, we would be more than happy to share it with the audience who express their interest in it, so that it helps for ensuring child protection during emergencies. Mr. Patnaik, I thank you again for this wonderful presentation. And before I hand over to Lee, who has rejoined us after she faced network issues initially, I'll kindly request audience members to put in their questions in the chat box so that we can take them up after Ms. Lee McQueen has done with her remarks for this particular discussion. Thank you once again, everyone. And Lee, I hand it over to you for your comments.
Thanks again, Paritosh. And I hope this time it doesn't misbehave the internet. Am I audible?
Yes, Lee, you are. Yeah.
Okay. So when that disconnection happened from my previous when I was speaking, I was reiterating what Anil Sinhaji had said when he made the opening remarks, that disasters accentuate pre-existing vulnerabilities, and therefore they impact different communities and groups differently, you know, in a very disparate way. It's not the equal impact felt by everyone, even though any disaster would affect everybody. So that is one point. And then what I really also took from Dr. Walia's presentation, she mentioned about risk factors for women and children. That's something that I will briefly mention some of my reflections on as I speak further. And then lastly, from Dr. Ashok, from Commander Ashok, I really was inspired from his presentation. The reason being that it was so energetic and so amazing that he also appreciated and recognized NGOs as being the apex institution in itself, the civil society in the entire scheme or the stakeholders that are involved in disaster risk reduction in the country. That's a great recognition. And coming from IJM, I do understand the work they do. But he also mentioned about linking people. He emphasized on the point of linking people with local governance systems. So that was also something which I would like to share my inputs on as I proceed. So beginning with, I would really like to say that a lot has changed over the years. Over 10 years, and with staying with Sphere for so many years, following it and co-journeying with Sphere India, we have seen a lot has changed in the way humanitarian agencies respond to any calamity, any disaster. You know, there's a lot of precision that has come about. There is a lot of the targeting has improved of the vulnerable communities, right from when we were in the days of tsunami, and from then the Kosi floods happened, and then there was a spree of mega events happening, mega disasters taking place in India, then Fani, and now this COVID. So a lot of improvements have been done in terms of targeting of the vulnerable groups, of the marginalized sections. And there is a lot of openness in the sector, I would say, to really dialogue, to engage on issues of marginalization and exclusion, specifically based on caste, ethnicity, religion. So that space has been created here. And there is a greater acceptance of gender inclusion. And especially when I say gender, it's not all, it's for women, which is again another grand step that we have taken as a sector, as humanitarian stakeholders. And disability has been recognized, and people are now, organizations are now bringing in SOPs and steps wherein people with disabilities are included. Everywhere there is scope for improvement, and we have come a long way. However, there is a lot to reflect and keep improving on. So when we were, Dr. Walia mentioned about risk factors, and my topic today is how do we integrate protection concerns in DRR, be it any thematic sector, shelter, food and nutrition security, child protection, women's security, whatever the sector or the thematic area that we may be as different organizations looking at closely, how do we really ensure protection is ensured? So in my opinion, and for all these years, what we have been advocating, the idea is that protection and resilient communities can only be raised and built and helped to really come up once we know not just the hazard prone areas, but also communities living in those hazard prone areas. We have the drone technology now, and we are so excited and elated about the technological advancements that we are making in making our humanitarian response really, really very nuanced and very expert and professional. But how can we also make use of this drone or whichever technology tomorrow it may be to really map these vulnerable communities, marginalized sections that are living in these hazard prone areas? So once we do that, I think that's where the work then follows from there. So locating the pre-existing vulnerabilities, looking at the pre-existing socio-economic, political, cultural vulnerabilities of these communities. And when I say these communities, these are the communities in our Indian setup of the societal structure, the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and the minority communities. There are denotified tribes. There are various subcastes in the country. So our country by itself is not an equal one, and no country, no society is equal. So, and this entire concept of neutrality, do no harm, should by no means, be interpreted in a way where we tell ourselves that let the status quo remain. No, that's not the idea. When we say do no harm and neutrality principles, then it means that we are challenging the unequal institutions, the unequal structure, power balances in the society. And that is what the mandate of the humanitarian organizations is, and it has been moving in that direction. I feel very proud of being associated with this entire process, where not that everything is achieved, but things are in progress, where we are challenging these norms. So when we talk about integrating protection, it is first of all about mapping the communities living in these hazard prone areas, the information which is available with us. Then how are these communities affected differently? What are their protection concerns? We talk about risk mapping. What are these risks with which they have been living even prior to a disaster, which will get magnified during disasters? Odisha government has been really doing spectacular job in its response over and over again. But even with Fani, we saw that there were media reports where it was said that even though the monetary assistance reached all the people, almost evenly, everybody received it across the communities. However, there were instances where people were shooed away from cyclone shelters and they took refuge by the uprooted trees. So those are stories. And in COVID itself, there are media reports which suggest, and also the fact findings and cases that have been maintained by a national campaign on Dalit human rights from where I come, where there has been a surge in caste violence and atrocities during COVID. Imagine even during COVID. So we need to really keep this in mind. We need to bear this in mind that when we are looking at protection issues in India, in the Indian context, we have to go with the caste, class, and gender lens whenever we analyze any risk, whenever we collect data on any aspect of response. Otherwise, we will end up leaving out people by default. So that's one thing, one point I would like to really strongly emphasize here. Then we are talking about the various protection mechanisms that already exist in the country. And definitely DM Act makes a mention about no discrimination and prohibiting discrimination based on any, irrespective of caste, class, gender, and all. And also the National Disaster Management Policy. That's a very good policy, and I have read it so much in detail that I saw that it's so inclusive in its content and its spirit. But now that spirit and intent needs to be really put into action, and that is only possible when we put in place institutions and mechanisms of safeguarding, of grievance redressal, to ensure and give people that power, that to empower them to report cases of violence, to report cases of discrimination during disasters. And this is where, as civil society, as humanitarian organizations, we have the mandate to ensure that the space is created, not just within our work, but also the state takes the responsibility of creating such mechanisms. One thing which I have always felt a little disappointed about, but definitely it's still again work in progress. We keep engaging with the NDMA and others, that while we have set high benchmarks and standards for humanitarian accountability, humanitarian response by civil society organizations, we would also like to see that level of accountability, that level of transparency from the state response. And when we talk, because ultimately state is the duty bearer, and we are there to support their work and to support their mandate. That is the mandate given to NGOs and civil society from the state policies itself. Therefore, we would really like to see the states take lead, be it the center or the state governments. And many state governments are really open to such engagements with civil society. How they take lead in creating such structures and mechanisms where people feel confident and safe in reporting any kind of incident. So that's very important. However, one lacuna that is really there, and we've been talking for years and years, is that while humanitarian agencies have improved in their targeting and collecting disaggregated data and reporting with disaggregated data, not that the analysis is very perfect, but still we are doing that. We are not seeing disaggregated data being collected by the state authorities when we look at the impact of disasters on children, the impact of disasters on women, the trans communities, and again, the caste, class, and gender lens, because these are the underlying risk factors which really, really make people so prone to any kind of a long lasting impact. It's difficult for them to recover if there is no state and civil society support. So once we have that perspective, collecting the disaggregated data, putting it out, analyzing, putting it out in the public domain, informing the policies, whatever we may do. We heard this consultation today, and the last entire week has been on multi-sectoral coordination, improving that. How do we really also work as humanitarian actors to really ask the state, not to even ask, but to support the state, or to maybe engage with them with this ask that how do we really see, and the process where we also get to see multi-sectoral and interministerial collaboration. That's missing. And that really creates some confusion on the ground also. So that kind of coming together, convergence is required to really make protection a reality. Then we have to have SOPs in place. The training of, just as we do the training of humanitarian workers when they are going for their assessments, joint detailed needs assessments, rapid assessments, there has to be training also, and again a convergence which probably can be facilitated by NIDM, because the mandate, by their mandate, it's training and capacity building, to really have this perspective of inclusion, social inclusion and exclusion in protection matters in humanitarian response and DRR. If NIDM can facilitate that for the officers also, there have been initiatives. I remember I was there for one UNDP training as well. This was about 2-3 years ago for the humanitarian team or the workers from West Bengal. So that needs to be continued. It should not be one-off training for just a batch of few officers. But maybe NIDM can facilitate this process where they include this chapter into each and every manual of their work, and different topics that they bring out, capacity building, the training modules. And I had mentioned about accountability. We have a great disaster management plan, a national disaster management plan, and India was one of the first countries to have adopted this in 2016. All the revisions continued, and last year we revised it, and in 2019 adopted this plan. But how do we really bring in the accountability framework to this disaster management plan? And interestingly and very positively, the plan itself identifies different ministries as having stakes in implementing the national plan, which also has to be done at the state level. There is Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. We tried to bring someone from the ministry, but we couldn't get them today. However, this is a dialogue which needs to also go to them. So how do we build in the accountability framework for inclusion and protection within the National Disaster Management Plan? Otherwise, it will remain a plan on paper in the books. And how do we also ensure, just like we have the SDG index, a process set out by NITI Aayog, and they are monitoring our progress, state progress on SDGs. How can we really do that for our DRR indicators? Something which is there in the SFDRR that we have committed to internationally. So these are some of my points, that we really have to strengthen that reporting and monitoring mechanisms, oversight mechanisms by nodal authorities. Otherwise, when nothing is monitored, it's just one response from one to another. And that's what is happening with increased frequency of disasters in the country. And lastly, I would like to say that whichever the sector needs to really, what we have done here is that while doing the sector guidelines, we were looking at the protection issues of different communities, of different vulnerable groups, and what are their distinct protection needs and concerns. It cannot be one size fits all. So therefore, keeping those into consideration, keeping those into mind, we have put down certain steps in these guidebooks, where we have also invited your feedback. But we have also to prioritize social protection across the sector plans and strategies, whether it is relief or DRR. It does not serve the purpose of DRR and dignity when we do relief and we just eject out of that place. That's not a good strategy. That's not a strategy in the first place. I think what is required is that once we enter a community, we really empower them and link them up to the various government programs, because those programs will help them sustain. Like during COVID, this was Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. It was a basket of schemes of pre-existing schemes. No new schemes were announced. But our findings, we had done a study, NCDHR did a study in April, May, and we found out that over 60% of women, especially from the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, were not even aware and enrolled in Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, in or even what do you say, there were these other schemes, Ayushman Bharat, they were not aware, absolutely not aware. Manrega, they did not know about them, they were not enrolled. Ujjwala Yojana. So these are the schemes, government programs, social protection programs are for the marginalized communities. So therefore, we should take upon ourselves as a mandate as humanitarian stakeholders, and the state should support this, and we should also help. This is all ultimately the state mandate, where we then act as a bridge between the communities and the state programs. We need to take on that role proactively, which we haven't done much in the till now, but we have in the recent past begun to think about it and integrate this element into our thinking, and that's how we have the guidebooks. So to conclude, I would like to say that while much has been achieved, we should, as a sector, I think our job is done well only when we have empowered the communities, assisted the communities, and to really to realize their entitlements, their protection needs are met, and we have, as a sector, as stakeholders, be it the state, NGOs, or the media, also has a great role to play in this, and we need to get them on board as well when it comes to protection. So our job is really done when we have addressed exclusion and social discrimination of the groups which are differently and much more worst impacted than any other, because these factors, these underlying risk factors, and the social location of the people that we say, these are the primary cause, the root cause of generational poverty, of generational vulnerabilities, and these are therefore also the consequences. So unless we recognize them, without feeling shy about it, without really feeling uncomfortable about it, unless we adopt the lens of caste, class, and gender, and look at the intersectionality with disaster risks, we cannot really have a foolproof and a very sound protection sector or engagements during disaster relief or DRR. So with these words, I would like to conclude and hand it over back to you, Paritosh. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I think you've touched a lot of very pertinent issues in your very brief and very crisp conversation. You started on by elaborating the need on investing into vulnerability mapping and investing into risk mapping, so that we are aware of the challenges and we can preempt the challenges that we might face during the times of emergencies moving forward. That's something that definitely needs to be taken on an urgent note, and that is something that can only happen when we are in a non-emergency kind of period. You've also elaborated a lot more on the importance of collecting desegregated data. I think in our conversations when we were having, where in response to COVID-19 in the initial days, we did face this issue of not having any disaggregated data, and as a result, our interventions could not have been planned accordingly. I think you also raised a very brilliant point that the data regarding caste and scheduled tribes is something that is not incorporated always when we are doing assessments, needs assessment, detailed needs assessment, things like that. And as a result, we are unaware, or we don't take into consideration that the problem these communities would face, the marginalized communities will face when they are in the midst of a disaster. So thank you for pointing that out. And I think that's a brilliant step moving forward, that disaggregated data should be a cornerstone of all assessment and all reporting that is done across India. At the same time, you have addressed the important roles that government institutions play in India, and the role of civil society in ensuring that these are firstly more inclusive, and secondly, they are more disaster risk resilient. You have elaborated on how in Odisha's case, for example, people did not have access to shelters, people especially from the marginalized society. So in that case, it is important that we have this sensitization, and that you rightly pointed out, moving to the next point on capacity building of disaster management officers, so as to ensure that these kind of vulnerabilities are taken into consideration when responding to any emergencies. I'm very sure that our colleagues here at NITM would be more than happy to take note of your concern regarding more training and more capacity building by the experts that we have in NITM. At the same time, you've also elaborated on the need of ensuring and strengthening reporting mechanism, so as to including grievance redressal mechanism, so that we ensure accountability to affected population, which stands to be one of the core fundamental principles of humanitarian work. I think along this entire conversation, you have touched and you've delved deep into what are the core pertinent issues of disaster management, especially through the lens of inclusivity. And we are very grateful to hear your wonderful thoughts on the same. Thank you, Lee, once again for being part of this panel discussion. We've gone through this brings us to the end of the panel discussion that we've had so far. We understand that there are no particular questions that have been put forth by the audience members. So I take this opportunity to bring to a conclusion not just the protection sector consultation, but the 6 sector consultations that we've been having over this current week. I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Anil Sinhaji, who has been moderating wonderful inaugural sessions right from the very beginning, and at the same time has been helping us in ensuring participation of government officials throughout the sector consultations. In particular, with regards to today's protection sector consultation, we also thank Ms. Sulochana Das ji, the State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities from Government of Odisha. She has borrowed a lot from her rich experience of working with PWDs, and at the same time has given us some case studies and some highlights into what can be done for the future. I also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Jagannath ji, the Joint Director of Ministry of Women and Child Director, and especially for his insights into the work done by CARA, his organization that he represents today. I think that child protection issues that he raised were similarly mirrored by Mr. Patnaik ji later, but definitely having a government perspective in terms of what are their ideas, what are their plans, and what are their mitigation activities is definitely something that we will take home with ourselves. We are unfortunate that Mr. Sahdev Singh ji could not attend this session, although he gives his blessing for this session, and we look forward to collaborating with him in the future. At the same time, I understand that Kamal Kishore ji could not attend, but we are really grateful for the support that was given to him, that was given by him to the sector consultation. I also thank Dr. Rajinder Walia, who not only gave really beautiful remarks in terms of the issues that were the risk factors that are faced in emergencies by women and child, but at the same time, she has helped us tremendously in organizing and in developing the design of this sector consultation. And for that, we remain very grateful to her. I also thank Mr. Shekhar Chaturvedi for highlighting really beautifully in terms of what are the various stakeholders, what are the various activities with which we can engage with people affected by disasters, and how we can ensure protection during emergencies. Thank you, Mr. Chaturvedi ji, as well. I also thank for the brilliant presentation made by Commander Ashok ji. He has elaborated, borrowing from his academic research, borrowing from his experience. He's elaborated on the principles that we can incorporate in our disaster response. At the same time, his very spirited conversation in terms of what it is that we can do to improve the handbook has been duly noted, and duly noted with really grateful remarks from our end. Thank you, Mr. Commander Ashok ji. We were really happy to hear you talk on this. I also thank Mr. Simanchal Patnaik ji, who has dwelled upon his experience of working in State Disaster Management Authority, and at the same time, given his expertise in the field of child protection during emergencies. He has made a wonderful presentation in terms of what is the process that can be followed to ensure protection of children during emergencies. Mr. Simanchal ji, we really are honored to have you among us as panelists, and we look forward to hearing more beautiful remarks from you in the future. And last but not the least, I take this opportunity to thank Lee for not only her remarks today, but for her sustained efforts in keeping the protection sector of Sphere India a very active and a very lively and an inclusive protection and an inclusive sector committee. In addition, her work as a lead for the advocacy committee in advocating for the rights of the marginalized and the vulnerable, the population affected by disasters and emergencies, has been greatly appreciated, and that has very neatly come down into the handbook of protection that Lee had led, along with a team of very brilliant sector experts ranging from a variety of organizations such as Oxfam, HelpAge India, UNICEF, and a lot of others. So thank you, Lee, for your remarks today and for the brilliant work and your support to Sphere India and all its endeavors. I also thank Mr. Vikrant Mahajan ji for facilitating these remarks, and also Mr. Manoj Kumar Bindal ji, the ED of NITM, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, for his support and for his presence in inaugurating all the sessions that we faced. I thank all the panelists and all the audience for their wonderful cooperation and support during all the sector consultations. And I hand over now to my colleague Siljo so that he can make administrative remarks for the audience members. Thank you once again, everyone. And it was a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your wonderful remarks through the 6 days of sector consultations. Thank you. Siljo, I hand the floor over to you.
Yes. So thank you, Shri Anil Kumar Sinha sir and Paritosh sir for the incredible and effective moderation of the session. And also we thank each and every panelist and all the participants for such an enriching discussion. Before we end this session, I would like to mention a few administrative directions. Your certificates will be ready in 24 hours. Visit our website www.spearindiacovid19academy.org and you can download your certificates by scrolling down and finding the name for today's session. It will be ready to download in 24 hours. However, if you are unable to do that, as some participants have faced technical difficulties, do not worry. You can email us at covid19academy@spearindia.org.in and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great evening and see you for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil sir. Thank you, Paritosh.